Apparently, there are also people here criticizing Doug Carter. They're pointing to an earlier interview here, no link, where Doug Carter supposedly stated, quote, everyone who was there that day was ruled out, end quote. And then, of course, just recently at the Halloween press conference, just after, he stated that they hadn't ruled out anybody. Anybody? So he didn't even rule out himself? I mean, I don't know. It's weird. Definitely weird. So the official overlooking is explained on the Murder Sheet podcast as follows: that a civilian FBI employee mislabeled or misfiled information about Mr. Allen when he was interviewed by police not long after the murders of Libby German and Abby Williams in Delphi, Indiana. As a result, Mr. Allen's name fell off the radar and the case was unsolved for more than 5 years. Finally, an investigator trawling through old files uncovered misplaced information, and the 50-year-old local man was arrested and charged with the murders. What happened here was some sort of clerical error or misfiling by a civilian employee of the FBI, Miss Kane told The Independent. It was not a malicious error, just an unfortunate mistake where a clerical error let the Richard Allen tip sink to the bottom of the whole file, essentially. And only recently, when someone was going through the old tips, they found that tip and thought we need to follow up. So when people ask why has it taken 5 years to loop back to Allen, that's what we've learned. Mr. Greenlee added it was not the result of someone calling in a tip or someone incarcerated speaking up now, but it was someone in law enforcement going through old tips and discovering information from 2017. So let's go over Richard Allen's attorneys here. So on Fort Wayne's NBC.com article here, December 2nd, 2022. He is innocent. Delphi suspect attorneys release statement on client's involvement in murder investigation. Defense lawyers for Richard Allen say their client has tried to help investigators over the 5 years since Libby German and Abby Williams were killed. Richard Allen's attorneys released a statement after receiving numerous media inquiries about the case and ongoing investigation. They described the statement as their thoughts about the investigation into Allen. The statement started by declaring their client's innocence, noting that he's never had any legal trouble in the past. He is innocent and completely confused as to why he has been charged with these crimes, the attorneys wrote. The attorneys wrote that it was Allen who notified police about his presence on the trails near the Monon High Bridge the day Libby and Abby went missing, that he tried to help the investigation on more than one occasion, including a conversation with a conservation officer about seeing 3 girls on the trail. The probable cause affidavit released this week mentioned 3 people who came across a man on the trail the day Libby and Abby disappeared. The attorneys also noted that Allen did not dispose of his guns, car, or clothes, all of which were mentioned in court documents in the 5 years since the girls' deaths. He did not alter his appearance. He did not relocate himself to another community. He did what any innocent man would do and continued with his normal routine, the statement read. So here is the statement here, a press release. We do not want to try this case in the media, and we intend to adhere to the Indiana rules of professional conduct that provide guidance on pretrial publicity. Clearly, none of those memos were received in the Stephen Avery case. However, the police and prosecutor's office have conducted many press conferences over the 5+ years of this investigation and following our client's arrest. On the other hand, Rick's ability to assert his innocence have been reduced to only one short post-hearing press conference. Accordingly, we feel it is appropriate, necessary, and within the bounds of our rules of professional conduct to make a few comments concerning the probable cause affidavit and Rick's innocence. Rick is a 50-year-old man who has never been arrested nor accused of any crime in his entire life. He is innocent and completely confused as to why he has been charged with these crimes. The police did not contact Rick after Libby and Abby went missing. Rather, Rick contacted the police and voluntarily discussed being on the trail that day. Like many people in Delphi, Rick wanted to help any way he could. Rick contacted the police to let them know that he had walked on the trail that day, as he often did. Without Rick coming forward, the police probably would not have had any way of knowing that he was on the trail that day. See, that's an interesting point. Although there are certain killers who like to become involved in the investigation and even taunt police. Again, I'm not alleging Allen is one of these, but I don't know if it's that black and white. Rick volunteered to meet with a conservation officer outside of the local grocery store to offer up details of his trip to the trail on the day in question. Rick tried to assist with the investigation and told the police that he did recall seeing 3 younger girls on the trail that day. His contact with the girls was brief and of little significance. Rick does not recall if this interaction with the conservation officer was tape recorded, but believes that the conservation officer scribbled notes on a notepad as Rick spoke to him. After Rick shared his information with law enforcement officials, he went back to his job at the local CVS and didn't hear from the police for more than 5 years. The next time Rick heard from police was in October 2022. This was approximately 2 weeks before a contested sheriff's election and within days of a federal lawsuit filed against the Carroll County Sheriff's Office by its former second-in-command, Michael Thomas. Probably all coincidental. In the lawsuit, Thomas claims that Thomas, had made suggestions and offered assistance in the investigation of a high-profile child homicide investigation, but those suggestions and offers were rejected by the sheriff. Thomas further claims that the sheriff and others in the department feared the disagreements with Thomas would become publicized as a result of the political campaign for sheriff. Thomas claims in the suit that he was ultimately demoted and replaced by Tony Liggett, who was later this year won the 2022 election for sheriff. Furthermore, Thomas claims he was also removed from other high-profile cases. Rick was ultimately arrested on or about October 28, 2022. Wait, so they don't know? In the 5 years since Rick volunteered to provide information to the police, Rick did not get rid of his vehicles or his guns and did not throw out his clothing. He did not alter his appearance. He did not relocate himself to another community. He did what any innocent man would do and continued with his normal routine. Although a certain percentage of guilty people could theoretically also do that. The probable cause affidavit seems to suggest that a single magic bullet is proof of Rick's guilt. It is a bit premature to engage in any detailed discussions regarding the veracity of the evidence until a more discovery is received, but it is safe to say that the discipline of tool mark identification ballistics is anything but a science. The entire discipline has been under attack in courtrooms across the country as being unreliable and lacking any scientific validity. We anticipate a vigorous legal and factual challenge to any claims by the prosecution as to the reliability of its conclusions concerning the single magic bullet. And we'll probably have to do a dedicated episode on this, but the way that you would show that is by having several different model guns eject a shell, and would different guns show the same signature if it was the same model, same year manufacture, etc., etc. I mean, obviously that's the scientific experiment to show that. On Rick's behalf, we argued that to have the PCA unsealed, Rick has nothing to hide. As importantly, we were hoping that we'd receive tips that would assist us in proving his innocence. Not surprisingly, we have been inundated with tips from a variety of sources, all of which will be vetted by our team. Although it is the burden of the prosecutor to prove Rick's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the defense team looks forward to conducting its own investigation concerning Rick's innocence. We appreciate those that have reached out to support his cause. The prosecutor mentioned at the last hearing his belief that others may have been involved in the killing, yet there was no mention in the PCA about a second suspect involved in the killing. The defense is confused by such discrepancies in the investigation and will be in a better position to respond as more discovery is received. Rick Allen owned a Ford Focus in February 2017. His Ford Focus is not in any way similar to the distinctive look of the PT Cruiser or smart car that was described by witnesses. It seems that the CCSD is trying to bend facts to fit their narrative. At this point in time, we have received very limited information about the case and look forward to having something more to view, that which was offered up in the sparse PCA. Moving forward, it is our intent to scrutinize the discovery as it is received and give the necessary attention to the volumes of tips we are receiving. To the extent we continue to discover information that points to Rick's innocence, we will offer up this information to the public, so long as we are not prohibited from doing so as a result of the recent request by the prosecutor for a gag order or by the Indiana Rules of Professional Conduct. So there you have it. That's the response here. I mean, it's curious. It's pretty curious. So the next hearing is January 13th, 2023, where discussing gag orders and such will be done. So that's curious. So Allen himself came forward. Now, some people that would believe he's guilty, he might have come forward because he realized people would identify him and it would look suspect if he didn't come forward. Is that a possibility? I don't know, just throwing that out there. Another post here on the Delphi subreddit, Delphi murder subreddit, regarding the PCA, can the state omit extra evidence they have against Allen and only provide enough evidence to get the affidavit signed? Just wondering why Kelsey German petitioned so hard to keep this sealed. Responses here, they just have to provide enough to establish probable cause. Definitely don't put everything they have in it. No clue why she wanted it sealed. Other responses here, yes, No prosecutor worth his or her salt would throw their full hand in an arrest warrant. There's more to be seen here. Which would explain a lot of things. And of course, if there's a whole page redacted, who else knows what's on it? Another post here by Wiss Corrupted. Evidence they have that is not in the PCA. There's definitely a lot more evidence that has been found or is still being processed. One, he still had the Ford Focus he drove that day, and most of those cars have cloth seats with foam underneath that would be perfect for holding DNA, such as blood. Two, the gun was obviously handled by him during the murder, so there is possibly DNA on the gun, even if it is just from him touching it with bloody hands. Three, his cell phone data is obviously being looked at, judging by the PCA, so GPS data and cell tower pings are definitely going to play a role. That's a good point. Four, they confiscated many things from his house that aren't mentioned in the PCA, such as small books and a shoebox. They also dug up parts of his yard and a fire pit, so that may play a role. Five, they almost definitely have shoe or boot prints from the scene, so they can determine the shoe size of the killer, and since he is so short, he probably wears a very small shoe. I don't know about that last one, though, because if the searchers... I mean, there's even rumors that if the searchers found the bodies in the water and they pulled them up onto shore, that's one rumor. But even if that's not true, whoever found the body, if there was more than one person walking around that scene, which there appears to have been, how would you know which boot prints were from whom? An interesting post here. Some people are disputing that some of this was like an intended sexual assault that escalated. But an interesting post here from Fresca Esca. I just really don't think this guy would assault two girls from his tiny town and think he could get away with it without silencing the victims. They would see him at CVS or around and be able to identify him. So what's weird, though, did he just randomly snap that day? And previously, in terms of profiling, because this is Valentine's Day time, people were speculating this is someone that might have had a recent breakup, etc. From all accounts, I mean, he's still married, he's married at the time, still married now. I mean, does that match the initial profile? And of course, the profile could be wrong. I mean, obviously, we don't know anything for sure here. Mary Jane Vermont posted this regarding at which point he decided he was going to kill. Mary Jane Vermont thinks this before he got there. So only 2 minutes ahead and he went straight to the bridge. Lies have a grain of truth. He said he was looking down at the stock ticker. I think he was looking down at the alert that they were at the trails. He knew where they were going. It's still kind of weird, though, how someone could think they could get away with this in broad daylight in the middle of the... I mean, it's just weird. It's weird, especially a guy that lived there. If this was like some trucker passing through that was going to be gone in an hour, I mean, that seems to make more sense, but... An interesting post here by Generals 2022. We've all heard that the crime scene would have been bloody, but apparently after the bodies were removed, no one who went there ever saw any blood anywhere. Meaning the police took away all the leaves on the forest floor for analysis. If he spit or left behind any other biological materials on the leaves thinking that was safe, he would have left his DNA at the scene. The police must have analyzed every leaf at the crime scene if there was never any blood left behind after the site was processed. Interesting point there, too, and as always, whether local police or FBI, obviously in many cases they play things close to the vest. They might have DNA, they might have saliva, they might have a lot of things. Again, it would be difficult to prove is it from the searchers who discovered the bodies and possibly even touched the bodies or somebody else. But if you have all the identities of everybody that was there and handled the bodies, and then there's yet another DNA sample that's unexplained, then, that's a step in that direction. Others are also speculating that this conservation officer report somehow got lost. Now, again, people can say it was intentional or it's not intentional. Either way, apparently it was lost, which is why nobody followed up on it. But if it's really true that there were only a couple of people on the trails, how could they not account for this small handful of people? And then also, what about flannel shirt guy? Another poster, DFP Parker 78 posted this. How do you keep the gun and the clothes? The incompetence on both sides is disappointing. Unless, of course, it's not Richard Allen and those weren't the clothes, in which case maybe he would keep them. I don't know. Or if he's just that insane. That could also theoretically explain it. Another interesting post here. The only thing I can think is that they were so focused on Ron Logan as the prime suspect, the Richard Allen info got buried in a huge pile of leads. I'm sure there were others in the park that day. From the info in the PCA, it looks like they did use cell phone data to determine some of the people in the area and questioned them, Richard Allen included. Depending on when he was questioned, perhaps not all the evidence in the PCA has been discovered and therefore his statement forgotten. Either way, it's shoddy detective work to blame. Another post by Deduction Power here. I now know why Richard Allen's lawyers were not impressed with their evidence against him. I really hope they have DNA in the crime scene. I don't think it's Richard Allen's, though. If they do, they would have got that in the PCA, but they only got that bullet as the strongest linked to Richard Allen. The DNA they got must be from that accomplice, which curiously was never mentioned in the PCA unless that accomplice is the masked one. Don't witnesses in the PCA have two different clothing definitions? One was wearing jeans, one was wearing black clothing. Yeah, that's a good point, unless they were confused and they really only saw one guy. But, I mean, if there was a second guy, would he really have been walking the trails? Or would he have been elsewhere? Some more posts here regarding the supposed suspect who walked on Route 300 North, a distance of 0.8 miles from the cemetery to the old CPS building with muddy and bloody clothes. The eyewitness account from the PCA has me absolutely floored. It raises so many questions. Was his actual exit strategy to just walk back to his vehicle on Route 300, covered in blood and water and mud, or was his original plan that day something different and his exit strategy was hastily determined? If he planned to kill the girls on the north side of the creek, why not park somewhere closer? And if he wanted to park far enough away and to not raise suspicion, why not have a better exit plan? I don't mean this to come off as a hot take, but is this guy just a complete idiot? Some responses here. He could have gone through the woods that parallel the MHB trail and then came out farther up Route 300 North and then had only a few minutes of exposure. I find it hard to believe he walked directly out of the woods into the cemetery and then walked 4/5 of a mile showing off his muddied and bloodied clothes for anyone to see. And you can count me one of those who, when I saw what street Richard Allen lived on and its proximity to Bridge Creek, that had to have been his escape route. Nice hidden area. He could change clothes into some jogging outfit and then bury the bloodied ones. He hops out on the street that connects from his to the creek, then he's just another local getting some exercise. Figured he probably waved at some neighbor or chatted them up to give him an alibi for that afternoon even. But instead, he was a complete dunce, parked his own vehicle where multiple witnesses could see it and report it. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, because if he lives that close, why is he driving all over the place and then walking all over the place? Yeah, I mean, this is kind of weird. Another post here. I'm thinking he was somehow tipped off, maybe via connections to the Anthony Shots account, or Keegan Kline himself. And law enforcement being so adamant about others being involved seems to support this theory of being tipped off. Or maybe he was stalking their social media accounts in advance about the victims planning on going to the bridge that day. I mean, he parked his car far away from the normal parking areas and did so in a way that hid his plates. When he sat on a platform looking at the fish, he was likely waiting for Abby and Libby to arrive. It just seems very premeditated in my opinion, and not many people actually walk all the way across the bridge to the dead end. He either did this dozens upon dozens of times, hoping for the perfect victims to fall into his trap, or he got incredibly lucky, or he knew they were going to be walking across that bridge to meet a hunk that drove a Lambo, i.e. Anthony Shots Catfish. I'd be really surprised if we learned that he did not park at that old CPS building that day, knowing fully well that he'd be murdering two specific targets. I think he must have knew he'd be committing murder. If he was planning a sexual assault, it's way too small of a town for the victims to live and not get identified soon afterwards. From the video, it appears he wasn't trying to hide his face. So he must have knew in advance that the victims weren't going to be capable of identifying him afterwards. I mean, there are still more things that don't really make sense, because if he's on social media, etc., and he sees the phone out, I mean, how would he not know that they could have been recording him and also be live streaming or whatever? And he still does whatever he does if Bridge Guy is this guy and if Bridge Guy's acting alone. T. Mike Bond here posted something pretty mind-shocking. Bitter Beat Poet, who had some great insight onto the case and possibly some inside info, theorized that the girls ran after the perp. The girls ran after the perp fell going down the hill. He thought perhaps Abby fell too. When the girls ran, the perp was able to grab Abby's leg and pull off her shoe. He then incapacitated her and Libby tried to assist her friend. Libby then tried to flee and he had her by the jacket and she let him pull it off, but he later caught her perhaps on the north side of the creek. If it was Richard Allen and he had a gun, perhaps he was having trouble catching Libby and cycled the weapon to get her to stop, which is how the bullet got discharged. I also wonder if Abby was dead on the south side of Deer Creek. I think Bitter Beat Poet said something to that effect. She could have been lying in the driveway lane that runs through there. Then, after he killed Libby, he went back and carried Abby over to where Libby was to conceal their bodies. I have no idea if this is even close to correct. The sad thing is, if one would have ran down the west side of the hill and the other the east, and neither went to aid the other, at least one, if not both, would be alive today. I don't think there was ever a chance the perp, if he had a gun, would have shot them to stop or kill them. There were too many people around that would have heard it. But theoretically, they would have also heard screams and such. So, yeah, I mean, again, the timeline here, there's just so many different variables here. None of them seem to really work. Like, the proper alignment of variables, I'm not sure if it's been found yet. I mean, perhaps law enforcement, no. Perhaps law enforcement have all the details. And when it comes out at trial, it'll all add up. Or perhaps not. Another post here. I honestly think Richard Allen did not think he would get away with the murders. I think he was emotional or angry and didn't care. He committed the crime in public and didn't really make any attempts to cover it up. Walking on the road covered in blood screams to me this is a guy who didn't care and was expecting he would be arrested. He never got rid of the gun or jacket he was wearing, came forward at being at the crime scene, even admitted all these years later that he was wearing the same clothes as Bridge Guy. 5 years later, Richard Allen probably doesn't want to be in prison, but at the time of the murder, Richard Allen could have just been angry and had just been in a fight or emotionally snapped and was like, expletive it, I don't care. I don't think there was a plan. I think Richard Allen went to the bridge to kill or commit sexual assault, but nothing specific. Now, that actually is more of an explanation, because if he really doesn't care about any of this, I mean, that actually explains these actions more than a lot of other things, especially if he was expected to be arrested right after doing it. Some more posts here also speculating on the nature of the fight. Because if there was some kind of fight, they're stating he looked like he had been in a fight. Is that a result of being bloody in the creek and moving bloody bodies as opposed to an actual fight? Southern Dig posted this. The implication of their clothes being found down creek from them, according to the PCA. Trigger warning, I think it could mean two scenarios. One, I'm so afraid that means they were sexually assaulted, which is disgusting, but means that there is likely some kind of DNA from the murderer, and hopefully it'll lead to a conviction. Or two, they fought for their lives and may have got his fingerprints, blood, or hair on them, and their clothes were taken off post-mortem and thrown into the river as a way to take off DNA evidence. What are your thoughts on this new information? And people are stating here, the Ron Logan search warrant affidavit states no visible signs of a struggle or fight. So, as always, plenty of unanswered questions here in the Delphi case. And hopefully more questions will be answered shortly. And if there is more than one perpetrator, there will be more evidence to that. I mean, there's just so many conflicting statements from all directions here. I mean, that's really why it's so tough. I mean, if there was some kind of consistency, something can be deduced here, but just the level of conflicting statements from all sides and sources, I mean, what can you make of that? The MindShock listeners can leave their thoughts, theories, opinions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind in the comment section. If you enjoy the podcast, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you're subscribed, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.